Welcome to A Better HR Business, the podcast that looks at how HR consultants and HR tech firms grow their businesses and how they help their employers to get the best out of their people. Remember, for show notes and downloads, go to www.getmorehrclients.com/podcast. That's getmorehrclients.com/podcast. Okay, let's get started.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Great to have you along. And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation with Sarah Chang. Sarah is the CEO of Clearwater HR Consulting, an amazing firm that helps small businesses across the US. And we're going to be diving into how she helps those businesses and how she's grown such a successful business. But firstly, Sarah, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
And whereabouts are you based? I know you're nationwide, but whereabouts are you based today?
So I personally am based here in Las Vegas. We're transplants from South Orange County, but my team is spread out across the US. So I've got consultants in California, to the Midwest, to Texas, to Ohio, down to Florida, South Carolina. We're kind of all over.
No, it's got it covered. Excellent. So yeah, I'm really curious to learn about the business. Let's start with, what does Clearwater HR Consulting do and who do you help?
That's a great question. We provide outsourced HR and fractional HR leadership to small and medium businesses. We really focus on trying to help small business owners that are really too small to really hire a full-time HR person. But essentially, as they're growing their business, it's always the concept of build the plane as you fly it. They're really trying to figure out how to build really fundamental, what they don't recognize is their fundamental HR things, from their compensation structure and their team as they grow, policies and those types of things. All of my team are all former HR directors and above. So being able to provide, expert level HR help for small businesses that they typically wouldn't have access to on a fractional basis.
Nice. And so what are the main types of HR problems, challenges that you typically would deal with most often?
I think it runs the gamut. HR, it really covers anything from business owners that are really trying to build and do things right from the start. We're talking about infrastructure build out. So policies and handbooks. We're talking about team org structures and performance management development, culture, aligning, some of their comp structures with the values of the business and where they're headed, all the way through, hey, let's talk about how to coach through a difficult employee situation or performance improvement plans. We do get a lot of calls about maybe some difficult separations they think that might be coming down the pipe, or claims that employees have put forward and they're feeling kind of inequipped to how to handle those. So we really do get the gamut.
Yeah. I know you've got consultants across the country, but you've also described a wide range of HR challenges, workforce-related challenges, which is tough for any business owner to manage. What are some of the mistakes that you see them making, whether it's them or their leaders within the business? What are the sort of the mistakes that they make trying to handle those situations or HR challenges themselves when it comes to trying to resolve those things?
So I think a couple of things. I think when they try to handle it on their own, number one, especially if there are sticky employee situations, for example, they really are just trying to address it as quickly as possible, which I totally understand. But unfortunately, a lot of times what can happen is it exacerbates the issue. An employee might feel attacked. So we had one client, for example, they had a difficult employee, they had some performance issues, and this owner felt like they had some HR experience previously. And so they said, well, I started an investigation, and they ended up doing was, in their conversations with the employee, they really started giving litigious terms to the employee. They really started handing them really tools in the employee's toolbox to come back and be litigious against the employer. It wasn't intentional, obviously, but when they're using specific terminology that they're not familiar with, or they're not familiar with the law, or they're asking questions in a way that can provoke a response that they didn't expect, and not being able to handle that with experience is risky. And so unfortunately, by the time they call us, sometimes they've blown it up a decent amount, which it's okay. I mean, that's kind of the nature of our industry, but certainly we're here to help. And our number one goal is really to de-escalate the issues as much as possible, as early as we could.
And certainly the big one that I've seen in many situations in different countries is the classic one where you've got the business owner, they start to hire in people, slowly get a little bit bigger, and then you've got classic one is the office manager, the person who's sort of senior in that office environment, and then they're given the role, usually via hiring, recruitment. We need you to fill a couple of roles for us, and so they do that. And then now they're taking on HR stuff and employment contracts and policies, which at first they think they can manage, but then, as you say, they might open the door to other stuff and create some problems down the line. Do you see that too?
I see that most often, to be honest. So that's a great observation. I would say the majority of business owners start that way, right? They feel like they've managed people before. In their mind, HR really entails onboarding paperwork, finding new employees. And that's the extent for most of them as they get started, which I get. And so when they hand that responsibility to an office manager, as they grow, sometimes you'll see it go to a controller or someone in finance, maybe someone in operations. Even then, unfortunately, this person's handed a lot of, as any HR person knows, there's that big depth and breadth to HR, and there's so much to know. And asking someone to focus on HR when, number one, this isn't their prime responsibility, to start with. But number two, they don't have that expertise, having to, let's develop policies that align with all these jurisdictional laws, or let's talk about really fundamental concepts of our comp structure. And what you're asking an office manager to do is, in that case, is really to say, how do we align performance with our values as a company and where we go? It's a lot to put on that they don't realize that they're doing. So essentially, you're asking an inexperienced person to handle HR in a way that's kind of unfair.
And as you can tell, I'm not an American citizen, but from my understanding, you guys have some crazy laws. You've got different headcount limits. You've got the state legislation, federal laws and stuff. So for an employer, I'd be saying you should be getting some professional HR help, not just for the justice part of it, as in making the right decisions, but also the procedural fairness. And then you kind of alluded to having that experience of handling it properly, because you need to be aware of the people around them. So, for instance, a termination, so exiting someone from the business, they then have co-workers, colleagues who remain in the business. So how you manage that process affects morale, employee engagement, which I suspect is some of your expertise as well. It's not just knowing what to do and how to do it, but then how to manage the culture around it. Is that fair enough?
Absolutely. And, I think what's hard about doing HR in the United States is, of course, we have jurisdictional laws across all 50 states. They're different. But I think what employers don't realize is that there's different regulating bodies for different parts of HR, which makes it even more complicated. So you'll have different employment departments per state that cover one part of the law. You've got the IRS that focuses on the tax component when it comes to wage and hour. You've also got jurisdictional bodies that are created specifically in that particular state. And if you've got employees in multiple states, it's hard to keep track of all those things. It's a lot to ask of somebody who has never done it before. It's a lot to ask of an HR person, but especially someone when that's not the full-time focus of their role.
Definitely. So I guess we've been focusing on the stuff that can go wrong. And many people think that HR is all about just staying out of trouble or avoiding legal headaches. But what are the more positive aspects of HR that you see, and how can it help small businesses to do well?
It's funny when people ask, well, what does success look like in HR? I think of really two things. I think the first, and this is a metric that I think is the most important to me, is it comes down to retention, right? If you're talking about HR as a whole, from a policy standpoint, from an infrastructure and a culture component, you're really saying, have we touched on every part of an employee's life cycle that they want to be here tomorrow, the next day, and the day after? And that means a lot of things. That means, their work-life experience from a PTO policy perspective. That means their coaching experience with their manager. That means career pathing and an opportunity to move forward. So when we talk about what does HR really look like, it's really creating opportunities for employees to want to continue to be at the business, but simultaneously still align with the business goals. Can we afford to do this? Does this help us grow and progress as an organization? Does this make sense from a business standpoint? When done well, you've got a great employee base. That's what your customer experience is really founded upon. And then the second component would be what people ask from the outside, what's a good HR person? What have they done? I said, the best thing you can say if you got good HR is that worked out. What they don't realize is that there's a lot of employee issues that come up consistently the larger your employee base gets. And when you have an opportunity to have a really strong HR leadership within your organization, they can de-escalate issues before they really become one. So I think that's what great HR looks like, is really helping navigate difficult conflict between the organization and your people in a way that both people felt like they felt respected. They came out with some sort of win. It may not be perfect for both sides, but in a way that either someone departed respectfully and in a way that they chose to, or, we were able to come to some kind of compromise that made sense for both sides. I think that's what good HR looks like. And if you can leave in that regard and you don't have litigation from the outside, you can say, well, nothing happened. It all just worked out. But the experience and the finesse that comes with time and compassion and strong communication skills that HR people develop over a significant amount of time really results in a positive experience for both sides. That's the goal.
So as you were talking, you brought to mind someone I worked with a long, long time ago, and they were asking people in a group, have you ever worked in a team where things just worked, where it clicked? And, a bit like the rowing team at the Olympics where everyone just glides across the water, and then compare that to the firefighting. And you're right. So having the proper HR systems and processes and people who know what they're doing, managing that, takes you from the firefighting, rushing around, just things popping up all over the place, whack-a-mole, to that more seamless rowing sort of analogy. So I think it's just so important. I know you've built a very successful HR consulting business, and you help many, many small businesses across the States. How have you managed to grow your business?
That's a good question. I think we've been fortunate to grow fairly quickly. I think we've really focused on a few different things, from building our different lead funnels to social media to building networking with vendor partners. I don't think it's really comes down to one answer. I think it's being open to trying certain things, to recognizing when something isn't really quick enough. But, even for me as a business owner in the last year, I've had to test things to realize all I learned from that is that it doesn't work. It was an expensive lesson. But if you don't go out and try, I think, a number of different lead opportunities, you really won't know. We've had to do that, obviously, as we scaled and had bigger budgets to try different things. But we've had to build a diverse, really, lead funnel, because I think what I worry about is really an over dependence on one funnel that if it's gone tomorrow, there goes my business. So a number of different things.
Yeah. And looking at the business before we spoke, I saw a number of testimonials and feedback. So I'm guessing that referrals and the word of mouth has contributed to the growth of business. Is that right?
The referrals have been coming in lately, which is really nice, because when we first started, we started from scratch. So it's one thing to work as a consultant by yourself, to be a branded business as a team. Those are all really new. I think what I'm grateful for is I have a phenomenal team. Every one of my leaders are very senior. And not only are they very senior, I do have a number of criteria, but they really care about the people we serve and the people we support and our clients. They have a deep compassion for both the employee and the employer, and are strategic leaders in their own right. So the referral component has been very nice. It's not one that I guess I rely on as far as growth goes. I wouldn't say it's enough of the business to say that helps us grow, but it does manage some of the attrition, which is nice.
So having grown a successful business, and you've built an amazing team of experienced, wise, practical HR professionals who can go and help these small business owners sort out their HR challenges, but then take it into the more positive territory and grow from there. What's your advice when it comes to growing a successful business overall?
What's funny, and I think maybe your HR listeners would relate to this, it's applying the things that we've known from day one, which means every aspect of the business has to align. How we build our team structure with our compensation structure, with how we incentivize growth. Like, every one of these components really have to align together from the very beginning. Even our comp structure versus our pricing structure as a client group, what does it look like? How does it function? What are the mechanics? It has to make sense from the very beginning, and to draw in the type of talent pool you care about. I think every business has to look at what's our end product or service. And if your service is services with people, you got to make sure you have amazing people that it makes sense for them. And so I've always believed in a concept of win, 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 which means it has to make sense for the business, it has to make sense for the consultant, and it has to make sense for the client. Have I built a structure that can accomplish all of those things? And I think that being the core of when I started from day one, before we had any clients, that's made it all much easier, right? When I'm pitching a potential client, for example, they understand it immediately, right? It's a simple concept of this is what we do, and these are our business practices because we want to make sure that you as a client have amazing experience, client experience. I want to make sure that my consultants are well compensated so they can continue to be here and want to support you long term. And we as a business also have to survive so that we can continue to be here and support you over the time of your company's growth. And I think that resonates with people because they understand, it's simple. They understand it has to make sense for everybody. And in that case, everybody can win.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's a great sign that an HR expert is practicing good HR in her own business. So if I asked you a number of years ago, what does the future hold? And then suddenly we had this coronavirus thing and just that throws everything up in the air. But ever since then, we've got AI and legislative changes and economic issues and all sorts of things. What do you see as the future holding for HR for small businesses, for your clients? What do you think they should be paying attention to and sort of preparing themselves for? What sort of actions should they be taking to protect their business in the future in the world of work, in the HR arena?
Right. It's evolved a lot. So I've been in the industry almost 20 years. And the types of issues we deal with today, I'd say in the last 3 to 4 years, are very different than the types of employee issues or HR-related issues that we used to deal with 20 years ago. I think the biggest component, to be honest, is the influx of social media, I think, has changed really the environment for employees, their awareness, their sensitivity to certain things. And what we found in the last few years is that for a lot of employers, having to recognize, I guess, number one, the lifestyle component of their positions on the employees that they have. I think employees care a lot more about lifestyle, work-life balance than they did years ago. They're also more aware when it comes to their rights, and they're also only semi-aware of additional litigious components that they weren't before. So it also makes it riskier for employers because you hear a lot more litigious language that you didn't hear in the marketplace 20 years before that may or may not be fairly founded either. So a lot more complaints about harassment, about hostile work environment, about retaliation. Those are really strong words, as you know, that I didn't hear from employees 20 years ago, very rarely. And if they were founded by long-term experiences where they really had evidential opportunities to share, well, this is what happened, this is why, this is when. And, in all fairness, a large percentage of those types of complaints we're getting now from employees are based on really normal types of experiences. So employees getting negative feedback, saying, hey, you're not performing, you're not meeting expectations. The employee might more often respond with, well, I'm in a hostile work environment and you're not treating me well. And in all fairness, those were normal business practices 20 years ago and still are. But that sensitivity is just more apparent these days than it was. So employers just have to be more careful. There's more education that has to happen, I think, on both sides. But you're seeing kind of an uptick in the need for an HR leader who's experienced, not just in knowing the law. I'd say that's the lowest bar. But really, how do we apply it in a way that in a coaching aspect, in an opportunity that really aligns with the business to be strategic, to do some coaching, to communicate in a way that you really just can't get off of AI. AI is great, but it's very limiting.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can ask it and it'll tell you some phrases to use, or it'll give you quite a comprehensive thing, but what's the tone? What's the environment? There's so much that's missing. But I was nodding, furiously when you were sort of saying about the rise of people reacting in different ways and maybe acting more in a litigious way, or I've definitely noticed that. So it's a tough one for employers, Dan.
Yeah, across the team from my consultants, across the client base from our clients, I can't imagine how many times I've heard it from employers who've been in business for a lot of time who've said, it wasn't like this before, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, it is now.
On the flip side, for employers, maybe that's good news to think, well, it's not just me. There is a bigger thing. There's a bigger picture. And you're seeing that from your position.
Right. I try to help them know they're not the only one. They're not a terrible employer, because a lot of them feel really downtrodden. They're kind of isolated in their own world. When they recognize maybe it's not just me, maybe the landscape is changing. And that means I have to change. Because what sometimes I think is that case is isolated. If I get rid of this one person, this problem will go away. And what we're helping them realize and what they're realizing on their own too is that's not true. They genuinely have to change how they've led and done business than they used to.
Yeah. Small business. Like people who are employees and, you've got your Glassdoor review sites and all those sort of these things. And they're talking about how employers might badmouth them or complain about the boss and all that sort of stuff. But most small business owners, in my experience, they're very excited when they get their first hire and then they're slowly expanding it. It's like a source of pride and they want to do well. I think in most cases, you'll always get your, rotten egg or whatever, but I think they want to do well and they want to make it a great place to work and for people to feel that they can do their best and help their customers and clients in however they do that. So I love the fact that you're helping them achieve that, solve the headaches and problems and then free them up to create an even better workplace, a better service, better products, which is better for everyone in terms of, economic growth and opportunities and all that kind of stuff.
Well, thank you. That is the goal.
Yeah. You've built an amazing business. You're helping businesses with their HR challenges. If people want to learn more about Clearwater HR Consulting, what should they do next?
I'd say book a call. We're a small business too. And that's why I understand small business owners that we're a small business too. So really, when they book a call, they really are here to talk to me. So what I try to help business owners understand is that I understand the challenges that they have in trying to grow their business. But alternatively, I've also been an HR leader for almost 20 years, trying to help them align what are their goals, what do they want to accomplish, what does this look like? And let's talk together, So booking a first consult through our website. Our website's clearwaterhrconsulting.com. We've got a booking link in there. It literally is to my calendar. So I'm here to talk to business owners and help them grow. That's the goal.
If you're listening to this on the go, we'll have the links in the show notes. But yeah, I'd highly recommend taking that opportunity to look at the website, have a look around and then booking the call and talk to Sarah. But Sarah, thank you very much for sharing your story, but also your advice for people listening on how to grow a better business and achieve success in the area of HR for those businesses. So thank you very much.
Of course. Thanks again for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on A Better HR Business, the podcast that explores the world of HR consulting and HR tech businesses. For show notes and downloads, go to www.getmorehrclients.com/podcast. That's getmorehrclients.com/podcast. Remember to subscribe and share the show with any friends who are busy growing a HR business. Thanks and see you next time.